There it is. These men come in and tell them once again, we need money. We know there's oil down there. We have a geologist and other people who are willing to drill, but we just don't have the money to continue. They have to go deeper. There's a lot of bedrock down in Texas. And as you can see, this is Spindletop, and there are no other oil wells around. Later, it's just packed with oil wells, just like Titusville. Yeah, Gushers, right. So I kind of summarized to show you that by 1902, we've already had Spindletop, and once again, this is how people in Texas, as well as other places, know about Mr. Gates. So he has the Texas company, he has the American Steel and Wire, because that's what he calls, with his barbed wire, then they try to get more and more horizontal companies. In other words, monopolies or trusts. And he's now got the Kansas City, Pittsburgh, and Gulf Railroad, or the Kansas City Southern. He has other investments as he goes along the way, and he's got control of Port Arthur. So to kind of wind up, despite trying to battle Andrew Carnegie because he's got control of railroads and oil and steel and owning like the Mesabi Range up in Minnesota, in other words, the whole operation that it takes from the raw materials to the final product. And he's using an old chum from Turner Junction, and that man's name is Albert Gary, who right out of when he finished high school, went in Chicago and became a lawyer. And he was very good, so it's an old friend of John's. And he starts using Albert, knowing he's such a smart and shrewd lawyer, to help him. But it didn't do much good. J.P. Morgan just wouldn't have any of it, and they made sure that when they made a new conglomerate trust that he was not to be included. They bought out his company, he got the money, and he kept investments in the new company, United States Steel. And then to finish, John goes back and forth to France. They bought a chateau, they buy paintings, but he's ill, he's losing weight, he has to speak in front of Congress, and after that he and Delora get on a boat, go to France. He figures the doctors there can help him, but the operation was not successful and he's already dying, and that's where he passed away, was in Paris. 2 years later, in 1913, his only son, Charles Gilbert Gates, dies in 1913, and he's out on a hunting excursion with Buffalo Bill Cody. Section 5, 1900 to 1935, and this is McCornack Oil and the Gates, Baker, Norris family legacies. We're going to start off with the new church that Charles joins in Elgin. He's joined the Methodist Episcopal Church, and there he meets Martha, and she and her brothers and sisters are working at the Elgin Watch Factory, and both are very active members at the church, and they get married. In the meantime, in 1902, he picks up a kerosene route. He does not want to stay on the farm and work hard, just like John W. Gates. And he's got this route in Elgin, but for some reason they decide to move down to St. Charles. Must sound like a better town to live in, perhaps. Or maybe there's a bigger oil route to pick up. And when they come to St. Charles, as far as I can tell, this was the first home, and this is over on 6th Avenue. The home faces 6th Avenue. It's on the south side of Main, and I think it's Cedar. And you can't miss it. There is a family in there now. And out back is the barn. So the barn is still there. What you need if you had an oil route, as you will see, you had to have horses and wagons. And this is an old picture, and I'm trying to stress how these old oil tank wagons, and because they're in a parade, they still have the strong horses, but they're advertising lamp oil. I get really nervous.
It's kerosene, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you could light a lamp with animal fat. You could light a lamp with even plant oil.
It drove out whale oil.
And then the whale oil, I didn't realize wasn't around too long, fortunately for the whales.
That replaced my cars.
Yeah, I kept thinking it was hundreds of years, but it was like 20 or 30. So down in St. Charles, he's growing his business. And here he is. And once again, this is another parade. I'm sure Charles, when he's doing his oil deliveries, he's not wearing his proper hat and suit. But this was one of the parades that I'm sure were every year in St. Charles. I love the horses. These are very strong horses. And I don't know a whole lot about Colonel Baker's horses other than Greyhound, because since I've been a child, I've admired that horse. But he raised horses to the east side of St. Charles, out here where Pheasant Run is now located. And these are beautiful, big, strong horses. And what I'm stressing here is he worked hard, as a milkman would have known, or a dairyman. You have to work hard, and back in those days, he had to go further east of here to get the kerosene to bring out here. And of course, they had railroads coming from Pennsylvania to Chicago. So that's where he would have to go. So in the morning, you get up and you gear up your horses, hook them up to the wagons, and take off summer and winter. And he didn't, as you'll see, he didn't have a truck for a number of years yet. They weren't quite for sale yet. Let's see if I can pull this next animation. And we just came across this picture recently. I am fascinated. Once again, getting personal, I remember my dad always saying he had to go in towards Chicago to the big belt area where the trains were coming in to purchase the oil. That's what he did from day one. And look, can you imagine this? This has got to be between 1904 and 1909. Look at these guys unloading from Oil City, Pennsylvania, this big car filled with kerosene. Were they even developing much motor oil then? And it's wintertime. And we thought we'd add a few papers showing his first cash book of his first 2 years, and the receipt that he got for buying the Elgin Oil Company in 1902. This is where he kept all his pluses and minuses, expenditures and income. And up in the top, you'll see a receipt from 1907. He's ordering some more wagons. He's also ordering the sleighs besides the wheels. I thought that was interesting. And Charles, by 1912, has expanded his oil business. He's gotten a partner, I believe, down in Aurora, right along the river. It's Vine and River Road on the west side. And it's Mr. Hoyer, and the Beacon News did a big spread, and that's where that's where I got this photograph. My grandmother Martha saved the newspaper. And finally, probably we're guessing, I don't have an accurate date when he would have gotten the truck. Perhaps Tom would know when when the dairy deliveries changed from horse and wagon to a truck. And there's McCornack Oil. I love these old trucks. There it is. Now, this does not say McCornack Oil, it says Naperville Oil. However, my grandfather would invest, just like John W. Gates. He'd invest in another company. And yet these fellas got into a co-op, just like farmers do, or small grocery stores, small pharmacies. You get in a co-op if you aren't taken over and run by some multinational or national company. And it was the independent gas dealers. So you'll see this logo not only here on the sign, but in other photographs of fuel tanks. This is fascinating because he loved his cars, and because his brother was with Hudson Motor Company, he would make sure he bought that. But there's my dad in the back of this car, and they're at Daytona Beach in Florida. So I don't know where they rented it, probably a friend. My grandmother her family went there from Europe to northern Florida around Stark because her father was a teacher. And so they would go and visit family, and that wasn't far from Daytona Beach. But I just get a bang out of this. He's trying out this car with my dad in the back. And there's other cars. And there's my dad in the back there, a little bit younger. And Martha and Donald. And that's the Hudson. And quickly, here's a nice family portrait. 1950, my dad was born in 1913. So I figure it was probably about that time. And the war is coming up. And of course, as many of you know, in August 1914, World War I started, the Great War in Europe. And here in America, we didn't join until April 6th, 1917. They really dragged their feet here, you could say, because unfortunately the enemy came through Belgium. And Belgium had about 12 men in the armed services because it was kind of a new made-up country. It was the lowlands before that. And that was the smart strategic move, come in through Germany and drop right down into France. And of course, that's why the French were pummeled right away. And then, of course, England sent men over there immediately, even when the enemy was in Belgium. But they needed airplanes, they needed tanks, and I think we were kind of gearing up behind the scenes, even though maybe the population wasn't in. We wanted to stay neutral. But finally we made the decision in 1917 to go help. And I'm amazed at the planes they used. They only went 45 miles, but the Germans had them too. And we trained pilots in the United States, but where I live right now, we have the Grapevine Prairie. And at that time, the Canadians said, we can't train all our pilots up here in Canada half the year because it's cold. So we know down in Dallas-Fort Worth, they have airports. So why can't we go down there and practice flying, which they did. So therefore, we were ready. We were training pilots down there. And here's the part about Delora. She continues to travel down to Port Arthur, travel to out here to St. Charles to see her family. But she continues to live in New York City. And in 1918, and here again, these estimates of their wealth at the time vary. But as most of us know, in her will, because they had no direct family left, it was to Colonel Edward J. Baker, Delora's younger brother, and her niece, because her sister Laverne had passed away years before. Her niece was Delora Angel. I mean, I haven't said too much about it, but coming down here when the McCornacks, my family, came to St. Charles, they immediately joined this Methodist Episcopal Church. And we're very active in church. I don't remember my grandmother Martha playing the piano and singing, but apparently back then she did. It was in church programs. And Delora was born in 1902, and Lois was born a few months later in 1903. So those little girls knew each other and were friends from the time they were little children. And there they are. They did a lot of summertime up at the Angel's Nest at Tomahawk Lake in Wisconsin. So now the war's over, and here's Charles McCornack, and he's got his office in his home, that one down on South Main Street, and he built it big enough with a barn and an office. And this is the West Side Station, the first one he built, and there is a fascinating old car inside.
That,
Yes.
mention the fact that's the filling station restaurant.
I'm sure, yeah. When I was in school, my classmates would tease me about the big McCornack sign that was there on that building. So I got called Tex for Texaco, I guess, because I didn't live in Texas then. And this is a picture I recently have come across. And do you recognize the people in the picture? Who knows? We know. It's the two sons of Charles McCornack. And there's Donald, who was about 6 years older than his younger brother, my dad, Elmore. And there's Elmore. So I guess he's high school, but he took a year off before he went on to college up in Beloit because he wanted to work in the company full time, then get settled down, go to college.
Is your dad on our left or the right?
Elmore's on the right. He was taller than his brother. And Donald is the... Okay. By 1922, so I jumped ahead a little bit there, back to Delora and Lois. So they graduated high school, but Delora's father, Frank Angel, decides she better take a trip to Europe because she's got this old school friend, Lester Norris, who she really likes. So let's go to Europe and meet some people. And let's take your good friend, Lois McCornack, along. And Lois did write letters back and mail them to the Chronicle telling about their trip. So Lois got to see a lot of Europe, England, and Scotland. Evan. Yeah. And this is a neat picture we don't have, but if you notice there's a stamp on it, and I found it on the internet, and this was apparently a big publicity picture that was taken. It looks like it could be the Baker Memorial Community Center by the chairs in the background. And there's Delora and Lester Norris. And they're engaged, and this was December 22, and the reporters quoted Delora as saying, well, we're going to have a quiet wedding if we have one. And then Lois goes off to college, and they get married in 1923. So, skipping on to, well, let me backtrack. Give you a little history. The Baker Memorial Center was built, 27? And in 28, the Hotel Baker opens in June. And the McCornack Oil Company station is completed. And this is where I start calling it a headquarters because, as you can tell from the layout of the building and the plans that are displayed, my grandfather must have made an office back here, which made sense. So it wasn't just a filling gas station, it was also his headquarters. And as you can see, the Tudor Revival style, and that's what they made the Geneva Batavia stations to look like. This is the interior, which I believe we have a photograph of this in the display.
Which is this room, if I'm not wrong.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, how it looks so different. There's a large collection of these slides, which we have on display in a lighted display over in the case, of what they showed maybe just at the Arcada or maybe other theaters, advertising McCornack Oil Company. Now, there's no artist's signature, but I've often wondered who did this artwork along with some others. And this is Batavia. And we don't have our cheap ends here, but I remember going there, but more in more recent times. But he would remember since he grew up in Batavia. But these are old photos. And look at this one. I thought, what is that? When I first saw it, it's a little photograph. But it, as Evan pointed out, that's a, would be the, where you take your car to be serviced. It must have been added on. It's so cute, it just sits out there in the snow. Oh, okay. All right, on this one, was in the paper, I'm not sure who put it in, apparently it was 1936, somebody decided to do a summary. But it was in June 1935 that Charles was with his friends out at the St. Charles Country Club on the golf course, which was originally a ski club or trap shooting club. And he collapses on the golf course and his friends can't revive him, so he's passed away June 1935.
How old was he?
73 to 62. After that, instead of having the independent oil companies gas here at all our stations and in our bulk plants, which were in St. Charles as well as Aurora, Elburn, and he had a station in DeKalb were part ownership, we decided as a company, private company, to go with Texaco. And of course, as you know, the majority of the Texaco stock was part of the John W. Gates estate. So that's part of that inheritance that Colonel Baker and Delora Norris inherited. Note the star. Texaco's always had a star. Anybody here familiar or been to Texas and noticed the buildings? A lot of people just love the Lone Star of Texas. So that's where it came from. I won't go into detail where the Lone Star of Texas came from. And of course we had to talk about Ed Baker. And of course I remember Ed Baker, as I'm sure Tom does, because after even with his wife still alive, though his son died at age 22, their son died at 22, he and his wife then decided, well, as they got older, let's live in a suite at the top of the Hotel Baker. And I can remember then, in the 50s for sure, probably the 40s, going into the coffee shop or the little sandwich shop. There he'd be sitting at his table and you could go over and talk to him. And it was just small town special hotel. And of course, when you went in the Baker, you could see all these beautiful paintings of Greyhound, because he was he was lucky to buy this wonderful horse. And we're on 635 to 62. We have some more changes. They decided to revamp the Texaco station on the west side. I mean, the McCornack Oil station. and become Texaco.
That's the filling station. With the bay on to
Yeah, they eventually had one, but originally they didn't have the service area.